Iron Lung was the surprise indie horror hit of 2022. It got a second wave in 2023 also, but we don't need to talk about that. This weird, micro-budget horror game has spawned countless memes, a dedicated fan base, and even a real movie starring Markiplier himself. What we're seeing here mirrors the massive success of past indie horror hits, like Five Nights at Freddy's, even down to the live-action movie deal. And with any great success comes countless copycats, or spiritual successors, or whatever you want to call them. My point is, there's actually a surprising amount of games directly inspired by Iron Lung. Some good, some bad. But I think instead of calling them Iron Lung clones for the whole video, they deserve a proper term. We call Dark Souls adjacent games Souls-likes, and we call Rogue adjacent games Roguelikes, so why not go with Lunglikes? Just rolls off the tongue, right? Well, not really, but hear it enough and it'll grow on you. Trust me. Anyways, these games aren't all directly inspired by Iron Lung. There's actually one I included in the video that came out before Iron Lung that seems eerily similar in many ways. But I didn't want to make this video to try and call anyone out. I just wanted to play some spooky submarine horror games. So let's just get into it. Rusty Barrel was the first Lung-like I played, and partially what led me down this rabbit hole looking for other clones. Of the whole bunch, this is probably the most Iron Lung in terms of game design and overall aesthetics. And it doesn't make any attempt to hide this. On the contrary, the store page says it's directly inspired by Iron Lung. I like that they're straightforward with this. Not that it wasn't very obvious the second you open up the game. The interior of the submarine looks like a slightly higher res version of the Iron Lung sub, complete with forward controls and even a fire extinguisher. But the big difference here is that you can see out of the front window. Now that I think about it, every one of these Lung-likes featured some sort of window, which was a little weird to me. Sure, it makes sense for a submarine horror game, but one of Iron Lung's biggest features was the complete lack of visuals. A lot of the fear in that game comes directly from your own mind, so being able to see outside of the submarine takes away a lot of the horror from Iron Lung. And I mean, I would know because I made a mod for Iron Lung that lets you see outside of the sub just to explore around and see what the world looks like. It was very obvious that the mod takes away all the horror from the game, but it is fun to poke around and see how it was designed. But other than the window, this game was a pretty faithful adaptation. You navigate around the world to points of interest and minor scares pop up along the way. While the game was easy enough, I didn't really vibe with the linear tunnels that made up most of the map. This being another big departure from Iron Lung's vast open spaces. The coordinates were sort of helpful, but given that there was basically only one path forward most of the time, I didn't have to pay much attention to them. Anyways, after reaching the last point of interest, a scary fish JPEG appears in front of your window and the game ends. As the store page states, this game was actually made in just 72 hours for a game jam. And given that knowledge, I'm actually pretty impressed by this game. There's a ton of stuff here to cram into such a small amount of time, not to mention the game actually works beginning to end and was pretty much bug-free. Even more interesting is that this developer made the infamous toilet rooms that I mentioned in my Backrooms roundup last year. So props to the devs on this one, they definitely know what they're doing, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up making a small hit sometime in the future. Moving on, I stumbled across a new game called Cold Abyss on Twitter. I was pretty surprised to see the massive numbers this tweet was pulling, so I decided to look into it. The trailer was interesting, showing a similar radio field descent that Iron Lung also features in its intro. But looking into it some more, it seems like this developer was already somewhat popular from a previous Kickstarter project they did. So those two things combined were enough to land it on my feed, and now I'm making a video on it. I guess that's just how the internet works. Anyways, that trailer we saw on Twitter is actually just the intro to the game. After the elevator sequence, you step out onto the ocean floor with a few tools at your disposal. I know what you're thinking. How can you call this a Lung-like when there isn't even a submarine? Well, that point aside, the core gameplay isn't that different from Iron Lung. You follow coordinates around an underwater map to repair cables at different points of interest. Except well, nothing happens when you get there. Sure, there are some objects like statues and metal structures at the points of interest, but literally nothing happens in this game. I was just waiting and waiting for some scare for the entire 30 minutes or so this took to play through. I even read multiple comments on the itch.io page saying how terrifying this game was. I mean, sure, the ambiance is spooky at first, but it quickly loses its appeal. Even if the devs didn't want to include some actual threat, there's still plenty of ways to make a game scary or memorable other than walking around on the ocean floor and waiting for something to happen. The only weird thing in the entire game was a cave with a flesh texture on the walls. I was really expecting something scary in the flesh cave, but nope, it's just the texture and nothing else. Even after I'd repaired all the cables and made my way back to the elevator, I was waiting on that classic Iron Lung shock ending, but it never came. The game just ends there, saying, "You did well." And that was that. Now, I rarely ever go hard on indies because I know firsthand how difficult making games actually is. But the only thing I could think about after playing this was, I just wasted a half an hour of my life on this? And judging by the massively popular tweet that led me to this game, I can only assume a lot of other people experienced the same thing. So thumbs up on the spooky underwater vibes, but the rest just felt unfinished. Speaking of rough indie games, the next Lunglike I played was simply titled Thalassophobia. This one was sort of a mashup of Iron Lung and Five Nights at Freddy's, which actually seemed to be a common theme the more I looked. In this game, your sub descends on its own, and you just have to focus on not dying to the various sea monsters out to get you. You can mess with the power, lights, oxygen, and even use an electronic deterrent to shock creatures. Unfortunately, either this game was bugged or I truly didn't understand the rules, because no matter what I did, I couldn't get certain creatures to go away. So I did a couple runs that only lasted a minute or two before my eventual demise. There wasn't much else to see here, so I moved on to the next game. Since I was already on the topic of Iron Lung x Five Nights at Freddy's crossovers, I decided to play a game called Unknown Life Detected. Despite saying it was inspired by Iron Lung, this game leaned way more into Five Nights at Freddy's and didn't really share that much with Iron Lung aside from the grungy metal aesthetic. In short, you're hurtling towards Earth in an escape pod with a killer alien holding on to the outside. You have to open and close the hatches, which makes zero sense in the context of space, and try not to get killed. You can block off the alien or use a flamethrower to stop it briefly. If I had to describe this game, I would call it Five Nights at Freddy's in the Alien universe. There really wasn't much else to this one though, so on to the next. After the previous titles, I was looking for something with a bit more production value as a refresher, which led me to the curious case of a game called Corpse Ocean, which was made by a somewhat popular indie developer known as Kira. Kira made some small hits in the past, like Lost in Vivo and the more recent Lunacid. Corpse Ocean is a submarine horror game they made for Dread XP's Dredge the Depths Jam in December 2021. A couple months before Iron Lung came out. And if you're thinking Dread XP sounds familiar, that's because they're the company that founded the Dread X collections. You see, Squirrel Stapler, which was made by DuskDev, the same guy who made Iron Lung, was featured in the Dread X collection too. Meanwhile, Kira made another horror hunting simulator called Uktena 64 on the Dread X collection 4, which happened to be directed by DuskDev. So you're saying Corpse Ocean inspired Iron Lung and Squirrel Stapler inspired Uktena 64? Well, not exactly. We may never get an actual confirmation, but at least we know these developers are pretty familiar with each other. I don't really care if Iron Lung is 100% original content or not, but the parallels are kind of interesting to think about. Anyways, Corpse Ocean features the same format of piloting a submarine to various coordinates to pick up barrels while things get progressively spookier over time. Compared to the other games I played, this one was by far the most polished, which makes sense considering Kira's large catalog of past games. The sub has a bunch of neat little things you can mess around with, the controls feel good, and you even get a funky VHS player that you can use to watch a vaporwave whale video. The game starts off nice and bright, but quickly becomes dark and gloomy as you progress a little bit. After a while, you come across a destroyed sub, grab some barrels, and head off into the abyss towards the final location. At this point, you've driven around for 10 minutes or so and let your guard down, so the game snaps you back awake with a diving suit jump scare. A little further on, you come across a structure with a glowing crack in it that looks way too small to fit your sub in. I didn't think the sub was basically the size of a bicycle, so I spent a little bit of time looking around for another way in. But eventually I came back and managed to squeeze through the gap into some sort of underwater stone temple. At the very bottom of the temple, the lights go out and we catch an extremely brief glimpse of some sort of Cthulhu eye tentacle monster. The outro shows a supposed satellite image of a dark shape in the ocean near where your sub went missing. I guess that means the monster comes and goes from the temple through that tiny little gap, so it's gotta be some sort of squid thing. So that's Corpse Ocean. A pretty neat short little horror experience, but the question still remains, did it inspire Iron Lung? Well, we may never know. Those are all the currently released Lunglikes I found, but there is one more game I still wanted to mention. Fathom is an upcoming underwater horror game where you pilot a submarine through dangerous waters. Sounds a little familiar, right? Well, Fathom is actually shaping up to be the king of all Lunglikes if it delivers on its promises. It goes way beyond the limited scope of the other games, introducing things like an inventory, various monsters, a scanner map, different biomes, swimming, interior sections, and a whole lot more. It's being developed by a small team known as Damon House, who've been posting progress videos pretty regularly over on Twitter. Now, in all honesty, I can say this game is looking more like a grungy Subnautica than another Iron Lung clone. But do the comparisons really matter that much? I mean, I dig underwater horror games, and based on the success of Iron Lung and Subnautica, a whole lot of other people do too. So the more the merrier. If I can point you to just one game from this whole video, I'd say Fathom is the one to keep an eye on. I'll leave a link below if you want to wishlist it on Steam, as well as links to all the other games if you want to give them a shot. Corpse Ocean was cool and probably the most original of the bunch. Rusty Barrel was derivative, but impressive for being made in 72 hours. Thalassophobia and Unknown Life Detected were forgettable, and Cold Abyss actually shocked me in how boring it was compared to the hype it got. But like I said before, I know making games is hard, so props to all the devs for putting their games out there. Even if I don't like a game, doesn't mean the next person won't love it. But most games never really see any level of success. Iron Lung is that 1 in a million indie hit we don't get very often. And with the upcoming Markiplier movie on the horizon, I'm expecting another wave of popularity to kick off more of these projects. So for the time being, expect to see a lot more Lunglikes coming out. Speaking of which, has that word grown on you yet? Lunglikes. 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 I don't know, just think it over. And before I go, I just wanted to mention that I've finally given in to all the requests and started an official Discord server. I'm keeping it pretty low-key for now, so feel free to hop in, hang out, and even invite a few friends if you'd like. I'll use it to keep everyone updated on what I'm working on, both on the YouTube and game dev sides of things. And of course I'm interested to see what the community is actually like outside of the YouTube comment section. So I'm definitely open to things like feedback, video requests, or just getting to know you guys a little bit better, so feel free to pop into the Discord and say hi. I'll leave a link to it down below. And as for everyone else, I hope to see you all in the next one.